Hey everyone, welcome back to Coffee and a Cocktail Bar. Very excited today to have my good pal, Richard White, who reminded me we've met before, but it's been a while. Richard is an everyday tourist blog writer. He's a savant when it comes to planning. I feel like he's got a big following. I don't agree with a lot of the things he says, but I agree with some. And so I'm actually super excited for Richard to be here. I know a lot of people aren't tuning in because they're probably watching live stream as council debates this very contentious issue around ending exclusionary zoning or blanket rezoning. And I'm sure Richard and I will get into it. But Richard, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you for the invite.
Yeah. So Richard, I was asking you before we got on here a little bit about your background and history, because I myself didn't really know. I've read a lot of your things. I didn't know what to call you, how to introduce you. So maybe introduce yourself to the people and kind of what your background is in.
Well, I guess, the title, the everyday tourist could have been the everyday Calgarian. I'm not a journalist. I'm not a I am a freelance writer, but I'm not trained as a writer or an architect or an urban planner. I'm just an average Calgarian who's lived here for 40 years, loved the city, and have traveled, a lot of places around the world, only going to the city center. I love the city center vibe, but I also appreciate that that's me. And there's also, when you create a great city, you got to create a diversity of neighborhoods that appeal to different people. And I've certainly developed an appreciation for, the suburbs. I was, in fact, at Westman Village in Mahogany this week, and it's like a whole different world there, and the people love it.
So, yeah, Rich, so you talked about background a bit. You were at the Downtown Association in Calgary for quite some time.
Yep.
Worked at an architecture practice for quite some time. What within city building got you really interested? Like, how, I guess for folks out there, how do they get more informed? You and I were talking about jargon. Like, how did you kind of find this passion of city building? I think you said you were in biology originally, or that's what you were trained in.
Yeah, no, I went to university as a biologist or as a scientist, and I had a mentor, and he was a real Renaissance man and was interested in art and culture and so on. And I think as a result of that, we're, art and culture is very urban. It's in the city center, and I became to, enjoy the city center vibe. We never had children, so, again, I think the city center tends to be a place that, not that children and families can't live there, but the reality is it is more for singles, professional couples, empty nesters, that kind of a lifestyle. And we've enjoyed it, and we're on the outside. We live in West Hillhurst, so we're kind of on the outside of the city center. I used to walk to work from Crowchild Trail to Bankers Hall every day for 10 years.
Yeah, interesting. So maybe let's get into that. When you talk about city building and city centers, I know you travel a ton and you've been to a bunch of different municipalities. I think Calgary is interesting and unique in a sense that it was a central business district for a long time, probably wasn't as family oriented, but that seems to be changing. And cities that you've traveled to, I would assume, like within, the European context, are often more family oriented. Are you seeing a movement where city centers are becoming more diverse in terms of the population that they're serving?
Well, I think one of Calgary's biggest urban planning flaws is that we define our city center too narrowly. So, our downtown would be our central business district. And our central business district is where business happens. So Wall Street, Bay Street, there's not a lot of evening and weekend activity. And so when we try to force that on, the 40 blocks between 8th Avenue and Center Street and between the railroad tracks and say 4th Avenue, it's still 80% office space. And, we hit above our weight when it comes to office space. You wouldn't normally have a downtown our size with 40 million square feet of office space until you had 4 or 5 million people. We probably have one of the top 10 office centers in North America. And again, the city's urban plan for the city center doesn't include the other side of the river. And that's a mistake. The people who live in, Sunnyside and Hillhurst and Bridgeland, they're all part of the city center. Any place that you can walk, within, I would say 30 minutes. And certainly when you go to Europe, their city centers are certainly defined and they're much more dispersed. Calgary is very unique in that we have this hugely dense downtown and then this basically less dense suburbs. But European cities are the same. Once you get outside the city center, they're probably not that much more dense than our suburbs, but they have a much larger city center because they were all developed prior to 1950 when the car took over. And we're like a teenager. We're still young and kind of finding ourselves.
Yeah. So two strings I want to pull in there. So the first one about this obviously massive office, that we've built here within our central business district, and then kind of the trend of obviously folks moving away from office. And so you've seen conversions start to take place within the city, and even across North America, Calgary stands out as this
absolutely
very, very gem of a city that's been able to really do this. And I think we did it early because the oil crisis hit us first. And so maybe talk to me about what your feelings are about downtown office conversions and making, that central business district now hopefully a more multi kind of generational or multi-aspected kind of community.
Well, it'll help. I think one of the things that people don't realize that downtown Calgary, if you actually define downtown Calgary from Shaw Millennium Park to Fort Calgary, from the railroad tracks to the river, which is the same as the Beltline, there's 20,000 people that live there, which is not that much less than the Beltline at 25,000. So, there is a significant population. But that core, is a central business district. There's no reason for people to be there. And, yes, we're going to add, 10, 14, smaller residential, which will help. But the problem is that once you have a high-rise sense of place, high-rises are not pedestrian friendly. And, no matter where you go, the streets in front of high-rises are typically, because a high-rise has one entrance. Great pedestrian streets have, as Jane Jacobs says, they should have, 10, 15, 20, 30 entrances. And you just don't get that.
But how does that apply to cities like New York?
New York, I mean, and New York, but when you go to places, the activity tends to be in nodes where there's a park. It's not on the street in front of, the Rockefeller Center, yes, with the ice rink. But, a lot of those places, it's not where the high rises are.
I love that. So you're saying we need these kind of secondary spaces to support where those people are living, essentially, to kind of create that sense of activity is what I get.
What I'm sensing is that, Calgary, instead of, so I'm quite familiar. As I told you, I have a brother-in-law now living in Eau Claire. But I mean, they're probably just as likely. They're not going to go walking and strolling down Stephen Avenue. They're going to go stroll along the river. And when they want to go shopping, they're going to walk across the river to, Kensington. It's just a much more pedestrian. There's cafes and so on, and it just has that vibe. Stephen Avenue is very difficult because of the high-rise buildings and the high prices. I mean, the land values are high, and so it tends. I mean, there used to be the old thing is it was basically a credit card pedestrian mall. That if you didn't have a credit card, if you didn't have an expense account, I mean, those restaurants are just too expensive to be going to every day.
Yeah, fair. So obviously we got some work to do in the downtown here to kind of make it a little bit more pedestrian friendly is what it sounds like.
I think in some cases we're just barking up the wrong tree. I mean, if I live on 10th Avenue in the Beltline, where am I going to go? I'm probably going to go to 17th Avenue.
Sure.
I mean, that's just, I mean, it's you do not get a main street like Wall Street or Bay Street are not, and that Stephen Avenue is kind of our Wall Street or Bay Street.
Strategically placing our investment in the places that we know people are already going to, it sounds like.
Exactly.
Yeah, cool. You said something else about the suburbs and kind of like the population within the suburbs and how, as you get further out, there isn't as many people. I don't know if that's necessarily true for Calgary. And you talked a little bit about Mahogany Westman Village and how it's kind of like it's got its own city center, it almost feels like. I think in the most recent communities that are being built, they're actually quite dense and they're doing them in a way that kind of mimics this 15-minute city. So talk to me about some of the new suburbs within the city of Calgary.
Well, I think you're absolutely correct that Calgary for a long time has been building some of the most dense suburbs in North America. And, whether it's West District, on the west side, whether it's, Seton, whether it's Mahogany, we certainly are, we've learned some of our lessons. And when you go there, and I actually have some stats that, only 23% of, in our new developing communities are single family homes.
Yeah, let's say that again. 23%
of they're no longer a sea of single family homes.
Yeah.
And you go out there and they're row houses. And they're 3, 4, 5-story type buildings that are much more like what you would see in Paris or Berlin in their city center.
Yeah, I love that. So, okay, well, let's get on to the hot topic then. So our established neighborhoods are obviously still significantly more than 23% single family homes.
Actually, the interesting thing about the new, people don't realize how many new home starts do you think there were in established communities last year?
You give me the stat.
Give me a number.
New home as in
New
single
home
family?
starts. No, total.
Oh, total. Oh, I think it would be low. I know you're going to say it's high, but 1,000?
Something like 5,000?
5,000.
Maybe, yeah. Maybe even higher than that. I've got, so again, it is happening. We've gone from like 10% of our new housing starts in established communities in the 90s to about 35 to 40%.
But we're
And
still
of those, about 15% are row houses.
Yep.
And 50% are not necessarily missing middle. Like they're not all high rises.
Yeah, they're mid-rise.
And so they're mid-rise. So there's a great diversity happening, which is great. I mean, basically we're taking and diversifying. And I always like to use diversity as opposed to density because diversity includes density.
Yep.
Density doesn't necessarily include diversity.
Sure. Yeah. So I think this is what the whole context of the word middle housing, which we don't, you obviously shared, you don't necessarily love the nomenclature, is why I think middle housing exists in my mind. It's to create a diverse housing option.
It creates a whole new option. Correct. Absolutely. So, you get a 50-foot lot, which is what people are understand, and if you build a single family house on it, it's going to be 1.2, 1.5 million. If you build a duplex on it, it's going to be, probably 900,000 to $1 million. If you build a fourplex, you're down now to 650, 700,000.
So are you saying row houses are naturally more affordable than building single family?
They're more affordable. But you see, again, I don't like to use the word affordable because affordable should be 30% of your income.
Sure.
And
but
so
we're
for
talking
low
about
income,
the affordable continuum. For some folks, affordable is even more than that when you think about.
Well, that's right.
Yeah.
But, so again, these houses aren't going to be affordable for low-income Calgarians.
Sure.
But they're going to be more affordable for, say, a couple, professionals. I mean, you can get into the market at 650. You can't get into the market at 900.
Well, I think that was the biggest challenge that the reason why we created the company to begin with was that folks who lived in the Beltline couldn't afford to build $1 million duplexes or $900,000 duplexes. And I think that's why we're seeing this unprecedented demand for row houses, both in the rental side and in the sales side, more in the rental side now.
And even in the suburbs, it's the same. I mean, 100%. The hottest selling homes are the townhomes row houses. Yeah,
because they are naturally easier for folks to kind of graduate into. And so I guess you recently wrote something about, boomers want more space. They don't want less space is what I'll take away. I think like that is a generalization. And I'm curious to understand, I've met plenty of boomers now that feel like they're aging out of place, but also don't know what their options are. Generally speaking, I feel like most of the folks that I'm speaking to don't necessarily want all of the space they currently have. They want to stay in community, but they're not ready to move into a condo. So to me, why I loved this housing form that is being debated is because there's an option for them to actually stay in place.
Except that the problem is that they have lots of stairs. So as a senior who's looking, 70-year-old, looking to say, okay, where am I going to move to next? I would not go to a townhouse.
Well, so the new form allows for a fully at-grade accessible suite.
Right. So but I mean, that will cost more.
I don't think it does.
Fully accessible, it means you're going to have an elevator.
I'm talking about like 1,000 square foot at-grade space with a stacked townhome on top.
Right, on top. You see, but in 1,000 square feet, that will work for some.
Yeah.
But it's not going to work for a lot of us.
For sure.
And that's you're just providing the diversity. And again, it's the same. A young couple with a small child will probably that will be their starter home in the inner city. But as the child gets older, or imagine taking because of all the stairs. But I mean, the fact that they have secondary suites also allows you to go in and say, okay, I'm going to live in, the 1,200 or 1,100 square feet on the first and second floor, rent out to help me pay until, so again, it's absolutely a great addition to our inner city inventory of housing.
So why are people so frustrated with the idea of?
Well, I think the frustration is not everybody thinks like you and I.
Okay.
And that's fair. I think we could be more strategic. I do, in theory, yes, every site should be the same.
Yeah.
But I think in reality, the fact is that we already have a mechanism. We already have, a sense of place. So I love the corner conversions. Like they work really fine. They still maintain the street as a tree canopy setback. And so to me, and I think I would focus more on TOD development. I think there's lots of opportunities it's just unfortunate that we're just alienating and pissing people off. And it's not healthy. It's not healthy for our community. Everything seems to be a fight.
Yeah.
Everything seems to get people, and I just think we have to stop doing that. And if it means slowing down and saying, okay, yes, we are going to, maybe it's every corner. And I know that the district plans that are being developed, they've gone to the community with the developers and said, where can we strategically add density to your community?
Yeah.
And I think that's the way to go.
But see, Richard, this is where I struggle with that concept. And as a developer, as someone who's in the space, I've seen those exclusive lots double in price. Like what was 600,000 is now 1.2 million because we've said keep the density here versus having it throughout the community. And what I think most people don't understand is when you leave the entitlement process, so developers have a 95% success rate on RCGs on rezone. So it's not like they're not being approved.
Right.
That land lift that you extract, I buy your home for $700,000. I go through the entitlement process. I add $500,000 to my net balance for taking that risk. This is where I get so confused because what I'm saying is like, put the actual value back into the homeowner and let them decide how they actually want to manage what comes next. Because navigating the entitlement process is complex. That's why there isn't...
What do you mean by the entitlement process?
The rezoning process.
Okay.
Like there isn't many folks that do it because they don't want to go through 12 to 16 months and quite frankly upset their neighbors and are nervous. Like they don't want to be a part of this conversation.
Well, they don't want to have a And I hear it in our community. The first question they'll ask is it going to be homeowner or rentals?
Yeah.
You know, and again, that's a bad scenario where we're pitting homeowners against rentals.
Totally.
You know, and it's not fair.
Yeah.
But it is real.
Yeah.
And that's where theory and reality.
Yeah.
You know, and I had an experience just this week when they came through to clean our street. And, everybody on the street got their cars off the street except for the rental houses.
Sure.
And
but that's still, I would say, a generalization that is changing. Like,
again, it would be interesting, and I've tried to look for those stats. I've tried to look for somebody who's actually done the study. It would be a very interesting study for the university to do, to look at renters and look at their perspective.
Yeah.
And I think some people have looked at, do they get involved in the community association? Do they have the same? And of course, Calgary is a very unique city because 70% is
homeownership. Yeah.
And that's a very different. Montreal is like 50%.
But I guess, how would a renter feel comfortable to even join the conversation when you hear folks talk about ownership and how much it means that they should be the ones that have been here for 40 years that their say matters most? Like, I wouldn't want to step up there as a renter who is barely renting to live in that community, all of a sudden start speaking up and think I have a right. Like,
absolutely, a renter has a right. Absolutely. And I mean, I went out today and put the chairs out at the end of the street, and the renter came out that I know, little baby, and we had a good little chat, and the dog came out, and we have a fourplex, and last winter he had to have an operation. We shoveled his snow. I mean, you have good renters and you have good homeowners. You have bad homeowners, you have bad renters. Exactly. Yeah. And you could have a homeowner, and I have friends, and they're loud and they have parties, and you can't, so it shouldn't be the renters against the homeowners.
Yeah. Well, you and I talked about this. Change is incremental, so it happens over time. And I think there's stats over, citywide happened in Banff Trail. They took 600 lots, and only 22 of them since 2017 have actually been redeveloped.
Well, and I think, Banff Trail is because it's a lot of restricted covenants there too. So there's a whole nother issue that is going to come to, I don't know how many different properties in Calgary have restricted covenants, and that'll all have to be settled in the court.
For sure, yeah. And I guess what I'm trying to basically premise is that this change can't happen overnight because one person doesn't own all those lots.
No, and I think, and that's certainly what I said in my piece that I talked about, is that it's not going to be as bad as some people are saying, and it's not going to be as great as some people say. I mean, the city, produced their housing plan last fall that said that they wanted 4,000 more homes built every year, 3,000 of them being for low income. Well, they're nowhere close to achieving that.
Yeah.
And the governments are very easy. They can put numbers out there.
Yeah.
And of course, the federal government, allowed all the immigrants in, which is great, and I totally accept. But there has no plan to how do you house them, how do you educate them, how do you, and of course that's not fair to them, and it's not fair to Canadians to allow all these people in without a plan. And and again, like I say, I think that we could be much more strategic without pissing everybody off.
Yeah, and I think that
nobody wants to do that.
But immigration, generally speaking, I don't know if it comes with a big plan. Like my parents came here, in the 70s, and they came here as refugees, and luckily enough, the government decided to let a significant amount of Ismaili Muslims into the country. There was no plan. Like it wasn't like we could take.
But there should be.
Yeah,
just because there was no plan then, and I mean the numbers that they're allowing in now are huge.
Yeah.
And we're also in a shortage, and we're a shortage of schools, and we're a shortage of hospitals.
Yeah, but I'm saying we're a country that is built on immigration.
We are.
And so part of me is like shutting down the immigration isn't
Nobody's saying shut it down, but manage it better.
Yeah.
And understand the unintended consequences or the lack of planning.
Sure.
And I mean Calgary is the same. I mean I came to Calgary. I had to live outside the city at start. I lived in a townhouse in not necessarily the best location, right off of Glenmore Trail. Yeah. We didn't have children, so that helped us out a little bit to be able to afford a little. We eventually, got into an infill, and we've stayed there ever since.
Great. I'm going to finish off with one last question because you're a traveler. You study this a little bit. I know that you're not a pro, but you're as close to one as I would say. Talk to me about cities that have had citywide rezoning and ended exclusionary zoning that have worked and ones that haven't. Because there's a lot of people that are talking about, oh, well, this worked in Minneapolis, but it didn't work in Auckland. Like, what is your, the research or reading that you've done told you?
Well, I haven't done much research in other cities. And again, I think places like Minneapolis, it's Minneapolis, the city of Minneapolis, which is 300,000 people. So it's not the 3 million people or 2.5 million that live in Minneapolis. Like American cities, you got to be very careful. It's like Vancouver. The city of Vancouver is only 600,000. If it applies to Vancouver, it doesn't necessarily apply citywide.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, I look at it. I mean, Nashville, Salt Lake City, Portland, Seattle, Vancouver. I mean, Calgary has been a leader in infill development. And I've watched the evolution, like even on my street, it goes from 1970s, to today there's there's a house being built. Calgary is a leader when it comes to infill development. There's been a natural evolution from, the skinnies to the duplexes to the mini mansions. And again, I mean, in our area, we have number of the townhouse developments that are from the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, totally.
It's not a new concept.
Nope.
We're just trying to, as you say, how do we facilitate it? How do we make it easier to do it and cut some of those costs and cut the red tape?
Yeah.
And I guess and it's always, as I said earlier, too much for some and not enough for others. So, maybe we need a little bit of some sort of compromise, that we need a little bit of more red tape in some areas and not, maybe on the corner lots. I mean, we've, allowed it along major bus routes, near schools. I mean, I'd love to see school sites redeveloped. I'd like to see
school sites reopened to become schools so we can actually take care of more people.
The schools are open.
Yeah.
And the schools are full in the inner city now.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Don't close the school sites. Let's open.
Well, no, let's redevelop them.
Well, let's build more schools, I guess is what I'm saying. We need more families. And so, no, this is good. I think like for me, key takeaways here is like we need diversity. We're not going to please everybody.
Yep.
Change is incremental. I disagree with you on just the corners because I feel like we've been doing that since 2015.
Yep.
We're in a crisis. We know that it works and we know folks are moving into these infill housing. And like you said, the whole purpose of kind of this middle diversity, this gentle, is to be sensitive to what's happening around it. These aren't 4-story buildings. They're not intended to be. And so I really appreciate you coming on here and sharing your perspective, and I'll continue to watch. And if you don't know Richard, you should. Everyday Tourist on Twitter, on his blog, occasionally writes for the Herald every now and then. So yeah, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Take care.
Okay.